Upgrade your game day with Team Toyota. Headed to the practice fields or the stadium? We have a great selection of new trucks and SUVs to choose from. And with our lineup of over 200 certified used Toyotas, you can find the right fit for you or your budget with 75 used cars under $20K. Don't get stuck on the sidelines. Our service centers are here to get you back on the road in no time. Visit one of our 3 locations in Princeton, Langhorne, or Glen Mills, or online at teamtoyota.net. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Phillies Talk podcast presented by Team Toyota. I am Corey Seidman here with you on October 17th. It is a few days after Dave Dombrowski and Rob Thomson held a lengthy press conference. They spoke separately, Dombrowski first, Thomson second, combined for about 70 minutes of chatter about the Phillies, playoff appearance, what went wrong, looking at the offseason ahead. And, as you'd expect, there weren't a ton of specifics. You don't often hear a front office executive or a manager be highly critical of players that were with them a week ago, guys who might be part of their future, might not be part of their future. There's really no value if you're a general manager or president of baseball operations in tipping your hand in one direction or another while the playoffs are still going on. Free agency hasn't even begun yet. While the Phillies are having those conversations internally and thoughts about how to attack the offseason, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to come out and declare, okay, this is where we're upgrading. This is who won't be in the picture next year. However, there were some interesting details. You kind of have to, in a situation like that, you kind of have to parse through the answers. There might be a sentence here or there hidden in a 5-minute answer from a Dave Dombrowski that says more than the preceding 4.5 minutes. Like, for example, there was a point in the press conference when he said, sometimes you trade good players for good players, which, okay, maybe that lends you to believe that the Phillies could shop one of their key pieces, not like a Harper Turner, not a guy like that, but maybe one of the young players is on the trading block this offseason. Because if you run through the roster in your head, if all the Phillies do is replace Johan Rojas in center field and give Brandon Marsh a new platoon partner, is that enough change going into 2025? Does that push this thing forward meaningfully enough? Does that make the front office and the manager confident that in a short series again next October that the Phillies would be better prepared with, a different sort of offensive approach? There was a lot of talk about a different offensive approach, not revamping guys' total, repertoire at the plate, but a lot of talk from Thomson and Dombrowski about utilizing the entire field. So going to get to that in a little bit more detail, but I thought that the best way to kind of go through and dissect the comments made by both men was to go position by position on the Phillies roster. I wrote an accompanying article at NBC Sports Philadelphia.com looking at the biggest question at every position on the Phillies roster. So let's just start at the top. Let's start behind the plate with the catching situation with JT Realmuto. So JT Realmuto is entering the final year of his contract. He signed that 5-year extension with the Phillies that runs through the end of 2025, 5 years, $115.5 million. And he's mostly delivered on that contract. He's performed. He stayed on the field. Prior to this season, 134, 139, 135 games. And that's kind of a part of this entire conversation with Realmuto because for the first time, Thomson and Dombrowski both said that it will benefit the Phillies to reduce JT's playing time, or it could benefit the Phillies to reduce JT's playing time. 130 starts in 22, 130 starts in 23. Nobody starts that much behind the plate. Not in the modern era, right? JT, if you go the last 5 seasons or so, he's several hundred innings more than the next biggest workload for a catcher. And that catches up to somebody over the course of a long season. Look at how the catchers in this postseason are producing. Will Smith, Francisco Alvarez, Austin Wells, Bo Naylor, all of these guys are slumping big time. And you have to wonder, is that because they've been squatting for 6 months at this point? That wear and tear catches up to you, that fatigue catches up to you. You don't have as much leg strength. You're more tired. You're not moving around as spryly. And, with Realmuto in the playoffs, he went 0 for 11 this season in the playoffs, 4 strikeouts, was beaten by fastballs. He's a career .216 hitter in the playoffs with a .295 on base percentage. So he has not been the same hitter in October that he's been the preceding 6 months. Most guys aren't, but if the Phillies can get JT any closer to the best version of himself for October, it should benefit them. He's entering what will be his age 34 season. Is JT Real Muto? And so there's two parts of this conversation. If he goes from like 130 starts, JT, to say 110, 115, well, that means that somebody else has to pick up the slack. And this is where Rafael Marchand, should be able to step in to a bigger role. Marchand is no longer a young player himself. In real life terms, he's a young guy, but in baseball terms, this is going to be his age 26 season. The 2025 season, Marchand will be 26 years old. So this is really the point where he has to become the backup catcher, or you have to see what he can do in an expanded role, because he's becoming arbitration eligible. He's becoming more expensive. Marchand is a guy who's flashed some things. He was heralded coming up for his defense, but in 3 different stints here in the major leagues, he's shown some offensive ability as well, some surprising power. 121 plate appearances, which is a very small sample size for Marchand. He's at 279 with an 811 OPS. He's homered 5 times, and quite frankly, that's pretty much the same output he's at AAA. He has 8 homers at AAA over the course of 4 seasons. So not exactly the type of player he's been, but it's shown that, he can catch up to a fastball. And it's not a foregone conclusion that Marchand will be the backup or like the 1B, so to speak, in 2025, because the Phillies could also he could be an attractive trade piece. Maybe that's a guy you shop, or another team seeks as like the second best piece in a deal for an interesting player. And under that circumstance, I think the Phillies would still go out and sign another backup, because like almost the unspoken part of saying you want to reduce JT's workload is that you need a backup better than Garrett Stubbs. Garrett Stubbs is really he's a very hard worker, and he's impressive in terms of the strategic element of his game, the effort that he puts into game planning other teams' hitters, and he really runs a lot of those meetings for the Phillies. He's done everything he can to make himself more valuable, but he just hasn't been an impactful offensive player, doesn't have power, and from a backup catcher, you want someone who's at least a little bit more of a threat, especially if that guy's going to have to play more. So that's the situation behind the plate. Moving to first base with Bryce Harper, not going to go as in depth at this position because there's not as many questions about Harper. The big question is just, can an offseason of rest enable him to recuperate the nagging injuries that he dealt with in 2024? Nagging wrist injury and elbow injury, he felt both of them for much of the season. Despite that, Harper still produced. He still had a 900 OPS, he still had 30 homers, matched his career high with 42 doubles. Was the only Phillies, him and Nick Castellanos were the only offensive players in the NLDS who performed for the Phillies. Harper also was a Gold Glove finalist at first base in his first full year at the position. So, the question is just, does a full offseason enable him to get back to the MVP level of Bryce Harper? Because this was the very good version of Bryce Harper, but there was still kind of another tier that he has shown he can reach. So we'll see if he can do that again at age 32 in 2025. Moving on to second base, this is a big topic here. So Bryson Stott and Trey Turner were probably the 2 players mentioned most by Dombrowski and Rob Thomson with regards to adjustments that are necessary in 2025. And with both players, the theme was they shouldn't be selling out for power. They shouldn't be thinking of themselves as power hitters. They should be trying to utilize the whole field. And with Stott, he hit 15 home runs in 2023, and it was a very good season. 280 batting average, had the big, moments in the playoffs, obviously. Played very good defense, did Stott. And for him, going into 2024, he's probably thinking, okay, I want to maintain what I did in terms of batting average and on-base ability and grinding out at bats, but the 32 doubles and 15 homers, maybe there's something to build on there. But that is not who Bryson Stott should be, or the Phillies need him to be. They need him to be like a 275 batting average, 345 on base or higher guy. They need him to work counts. They need him to be like another grinder toward the back end of the lineup, almost serving as like a second leadoff hitter, and he didn't do that in 2024. 315 on base, batting average decreased by 35 points. Power was gone. The power was sapped. And what stood out most about Stott, especially later in the year, was that he, again, was just struggling to catch up to fastballs. Fastballs of 93 miles per hour or harder this season, Bryson Stott hit 200 in 160 at-bats. A year ago, fastballs 93 miles per hour or harder. Bryson Stott hit 319. 319 versus 200 on fastballs 93 miles per hour or harder. They're not all created equal. Some of them are 99, some of them are 94. That's a way different pitch, but he needs to be able to catch up to 93, 94, 95 more consistently because everybody in the big leagues has that these days. It's like 80% of guys have 95 in their back pocket, so got to be able to hit that. Stott, it's a big year. Another guy who's going to be entering his age 27 season. So Bryson Stott, Brandon Marsh, no longer these young pieces, so to speak. They are still young in the game of life, but in the game of baseball, they're entering their arbitration-eligible years. They're entering the part where guys get more expensive and you start to have to make more difficult decisions. I still think Stott is going to be a piece of the Phillies in 2025 and moving forward because he gives you enough defensively, and they think that he can get back to the previous versions of himself at the plate, but he needs to improve in order for this team to improve. Moving over to shortstop with Trey Turner. With Turner, again, Thomson and Dombrowski kept saying he needs to utilize the whole field, needs to get back to a line drive approach. His line drive rate has decreased as a Philly. His chase rate has skyrocketed as a Philly. Turner was a guy who's always been an aggressive hitter, always skewed more aggressive than selective, but his chase rate was 28% entering his Phillies career, and it's been 35% as a Philly. Huge difference, okay? That's a big difference, and we've seen Trey Turner chase in big moments as well. Some of them are pitches that aren't even particularly close. It's almost like he makes a swing decision as soon as before the pitch is even thrown sometimes. But, with Turner, it's weird because he came here, you look at the track record, you look at just the performance over the years, watching from afar, and he looks like a 300-plus hitter, a guy who's going to be consistently able to deliver in multiple ways, batting average, power, speed. But as a Philly, he's been incredibly streaky, and he's almost become like just a power hitter. Like when you think of Trey Turner's best moments in 2024, it was when he was on that hot streak lofting balls to left field over the wall. And all the home runs looked the same. They were all that like same swing and that same trajectory, and they were all to left field. There weren't a ton of home runs Trey Turner was like hitting to dead center or to the opposite field. I really can't even remember him homering to the opposite field much as a Philly. They need him to be hitting line drives up the middle, getting on base more, utilizing the speed more. His on-base percentage, Trey Turner as a Philly, is .328. His on-base percentage in his career prior to that, okay, the prior 7 seasons was .356, difference of 28 points. .303 versus .279 as a Philly. Ideally, you'd be able to make a guy like Trey Turner the leadoff hitter because he has the ability to pop one, and he has the ability to spray the ball around when he's going right. But he doesn't progress deep enough into counts to be a prototypical leadoff hitter, and it's why he hasn't been for much of his career. He still slots into that like 2 spot, and he can be very, very valuable as he showed in June of this year and during his peak months. But the Phillies need him to be closer to a $300 million player. Simple as that. Francisco Lindor was this year. Trey Turner wasn't quite. He was good, but he wasn't great. And defensively, questions still remain. 17 errors this season, 23 last season. Led all of baseball last year with those 23 errors. And the fielding percentage this year was basically the same. Fewer errors, but it's because he played 35 fewer games with that hamstring injury. But Dave Dombrowski said, Trey Turner's their shortstop. Not moving him to left field just yet. Not moving him to center field just yet. Not moving him to second base just yet. 9 years left on that contract, and it would be a bad sign to have to move a guy off his position that quickly into the contract, especially because playing shortstop is one of the major reasons why he got 11 years and $300 million. But again, another player in Trey Turner, the Phillies need to be better in 2025. With Alec Boehm, the question is which version shows up. Boehm last season, an 873 OPS through June 25, hit 300. A 673 OPS after June 25 and hit like 220. And at the end of the year, a lot of the at-bats were just weak. He wasn't catching up to pitches on the inner half. He wasn't getting deep into counts at all. He was making a lot of weak outs early in counts, first or second pitch. There was moping. There was him hanging his head or showing frustration, throwing helmets. And all of that played into Boehm being benched in Game 2 of the NLDS, which was still in the day it happened, it was shocking. And still to this moment, it's still shocking to me because the Phillies played 4 playoff games. Bohm was their best hitter with runners in scoring position all season and for most of his Phillies career. Started in the All-Star game at third base. It was a series where you needed as much offense as you could have gotten, and he was benched in game 2. That just tells you how far the Phillies thought that he had fallen. I mean, some of that was because of the hand injury. He suffered that left hand strain in late August at Bohm, and he missed over 2 weeks, came back, probably sapped him of some effectiveness. But the Phillies talked so much on Tuesday about utilizing the whole field. Bohm does it better than anybody on the roster. Bohm's natural swing path is to center field and to right center. He's not a pull-happy guy. He's a guy that you think back to like earlier in his career, the talk was like the Phillies wanted to pull the ball more to show some more power. But if they want to utilize an all-fields approach, they need Alec Bohm in that picture. And so despite the fact that he was benched in game 2 of the NLDS, and despite the fact that the Phillies need to make some changes moving forward, I still think that he's going to be a piece that is in the mix because, quite frankly, they just need that offensive profile. So that's the infield. Moving to the outfield, this is where the biggest questions are because this is the clearest area to upgrade. Nick Castellanos played all 162 last season. He has 2 years left under contract, $20 million a year. Maybe the Phillies dangle him again this winter. They listened on him last winter, didn't really get any meaningful offers because with a player like that, if you trade Castellanos, you need to get something of substance back to replace that, in whether you're getting that back in the trade or someone you're signing. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of it is it only makes sense if you're A, bringing something back of value, or B, clearing that salary that he's owed. And I don't know if there's any team that's willing to take on the $20 million a year on Castellanos, although it's more palatable as the years shrink. Like it's more palatable at 2 years, $40 million than it was at 3 years, $60 million last offseason. Castellanos was also the Phillies' most consistent player in those 4 playoff games and really over the final, 4 months of the season. But he's a exploitable hitter. And when you think about the Phillies' deficiencies, he kind of exemplifies them, even though he didn't exemplify them in the playoffs this year. But he gets chase happy. He becomes easy to pitch to when he's in a slump. And that's true of a lot of guys, right? But you just wonder, can a team have that many aggressive hitters in the same lineup? Can you afford to have Castellanos, Turner, and Real Muto as your 3 top right-handed hitters? 3 of your top 4 right-handed hitters. I don't know. I mean, they're all good players, but can they all work in the same offense when they're all thinking of hits rather than grinding out at bats and working counts and feeling comfortable getting deeper into counts? That's another part of it. Guys feeling comfortable getting to 2 strikes. The assumption is still that Castellanos will be back, right? You move on to the rest of the outfield, it's up in the air. Johan Rojas is going to live in Clearwater this offseason. The Phillies have an offensive plan they're going to go through with him. They still like his defense a lot, but he hasn't hit, and it's the clearest spot to upgrade offensively, whether that means the Phillies upgrade at center field or they move Brandon Marsh back to center field and add a left fielder. I think they would probably prefer to add a center fielder because part of Marsh's value is that in left field, he's very good defensively, whereas in center field, he's average defensively, right? So that would lessen your defense if you were to just add a bat in left field and move Marsh to center. Marsh has not shown he's an everyday player. And the farther we get along in this process, I think the less it even has to be a conversation because actions speak louder than words, right? The Phillies did start Marsh against Jose Quintana in game 4 of the NLDS, but they did not start him against Sean Manaea the day before. They did not start Brandon Marsh really against any difficult lefty in the second half. And because of that, there's no reason to think that they're going to do it in 2025 or that they should do it, right? The question is it just improving his platoon partner, upgrading from Austin Hayes to somebody else? Or is it moving on from Brandon Marsh and finding a different corner outfielder? Everybody's going to talk about Juan Soto this offseason. He's the top free agent on the market, might get $500 million, might be worth $500 million. Totally changed the Yankees' fortune this year. I mean, they went from being a good team that needed some breaks to a great team that might win the World Series this year because of Juan Soto. And Juan Soto has a relationship with Bryce Harper, with Trey Turner, with hitting coach Kevin Long. Phillies have deep pockets. Wouldn't put it past them to explore it. I mean, they were willing to make a huge offer to Yoshinobu Yamamoto an offseason ago. They're probably better off having not landed Yoshinobu Yamamoto for $300+ million. But while I wouldn't totally rule out the Soto move, I don't think it's a likelihood by any means. I can't see why the Yankees would let him get away, honestly. But there are ways to improve your offense in the outfield even beyond Juan Soto. Trust me, we're going to get to plenty of free agents and trade targets throughout this long off season to come. But the outfield is 100%, the place where the Phillies have to upgrade. And, Brandon Marsh has been a good hitter at times. He's shown patience. He's shown some power. And as a Philly, all told, nearly 1,100 plate appearances. He's at 266 with a 786 OPS. That's 17% better than league average. He's a good player. It's just when you're as locked in to as many positions as the Phillies and when you're as inflexible as the Phillies roster is, you just need to exhibit some creativity in trying to push things forward offensively. And it's just a position to watch in left field. Dombrowski said Marsh and Castellanos are going to be in the picture, but we'll see how the offseason progresses. Pitching staff, far fewer questions. Starting rotation, top 4 spots locked up. Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez. As good a 1 through 4 as any team in baseball has. Now with Ranger Suarez, the question will become contract status eventually. Suarez is a free agent after the 2025 season. And when he had that dominant first half, there was the question of should the Phillies extend him now? And the price would have been a lot higher if they extended him then. But at some point, they're going to have to explore that, whether that's going into spring training this year, whether it's within the season, whether they let Suarez get to free agency. But he will have his walk year in 2025. The more immediate question in the Phillies rotation is the number 5 spot. Dombrowski said that Taijuan Walker will compete for a spot in spring training, but it's obviously not going to be handed to him. He's not going to be the favorite for that number 5 spot, despite making $18 million a year and having 2 years left on the contract. What's going to happen is the Phillies are going to sign several pitchers of the Spencer Turnbull ilk to compete for the number 5 spot. So it's going to be Walker, several veterans, several young players, and Andrew Painter, who made his Arizona Fall League debut last weekend, coming back from Tommy John surgery, throwing 99, 100 miles per hour. He will be somewhat in the picture in 2025, but I don't think he's somebody the Phillies are going to look at as a member of the rotation to begin the season or a guy that's going to make 30 starts. He's going to be very protected, Andrew Painter, in 2025. The Phillies are going to be cautious with his innings, still a hugely important piece of their future. He was 19 years old when he was battling for that rotation spot a couple springs ago, so he's still very young, Andrew Painter. You can still go slow with him. He's still 21 years old, turns 22 in April. And then in the bullpen is where we're going to finish up here. One of the only declarative statements that Dombrowski made on Tuesday was that they're probably not re-signing both Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez. Now, that's not a surprise because both Hoffman and Estevez are toward the top of the relief market, especially for right-handed pitchers. Both have shown they can set up and close. Both are going to be looking at multi-year deals in that $12 or $13 million range, I would think. And the Phillies aren't going to be able to bring both back because they have other things they need to do. And what that means is that it's going to push Orion Kerkering a spot up in the depth chart. He's going to go from the 3rd most important right-handed reliever that he was in the second half to the 2nd most important right-handed reliever. Maybe it expedites him becoming a closer, Kerkering. Increases the importance of Matt Strahm, obviously. But the Phillies are going to need to add bullpen because beyond losing one of their 3 most important relievers in Hoffman/Estevez, they also don't know what they're going to get out of Jose Alvarado next season. Jose Alvarado entered 2024. You're thinking, okay, he's going to be the closer or at the very least a setup man, but he was so inconsistent in the middle of the season, especially from a control and command perspective, that he can't really be relied on to be a high leverage guy next year. If he can emerge back into that, great. But the Phillies should be thinking about, other high leverage options in the offseason as well. So that's going to do it for this podcast. I wanted to go through the roster, kind of analyzing, breaking down the comments by Thomson and Dombrowski in references to different players with the Phillies. The NLCS, ALCS still going on. Free agency begins 5 days after the World Series. So that's the first week / second week of November. We're going to have a ton of talk this offseason about free agents, about ways the Phillies can improve. both Thomson and Dombrowski acknowledge that there's randomness in baseball, short series, anything can happen, but they still need to put themselves in a better position to avoid that catastrophic NLDS against the Mets, where they were just so thoroughly outplayed in like every phase of the game. It's a tall task, but Dave Dombrowski's been able to piece things together and make teams better as the years go by. He referenced his 2016 and 17 Red Sox, mid-90s win totals, won the division, lost in the ALDS both years. The next year, they win 108 games and the World Series. So it's not always linear. It's not always like, okay, because you were at the World Series level last year, in the NLCS last year, it means you're going to progress forward. You might see the Phillies, next year might be the year, right? Like they might win 92 games next year as opposed to 95 this year, but be better in October. It's all about who's playing well down the stretch at the end of the year. The Phillies prioritize getting off to a hot start so much this year, but really what's more important is the hot finish that every team covets and seeks. So that's going to do it for this Phillies Talk podcast. I'm Corey Seidman. Thanks a lot for listening. Catch you in a couple days.